I grew up in Jersey listening to stories about the occupation and liberation from my family and their friends. Indeed, many of us see constant reminders of that time every day. When thinking about the occupation and the stories I've heard, I reflect on the fear of enemy soldiers arriving on the doorstep and finding an illegal radio. I think about those who had to flee their homes and those who were forcibly deported, about the stripping away of island identity, and also the service of Jersey men and women who fought and served overseas. Despite the challenges we presently face, let us not forget that we now live in a time of peace in our island, and that is something to celebrate. History is what shapes and informs the present and the future, which is why I believe it is so important to recognise anniversaries like this. May the 9th is a time for celebration as well as reflection, a celebration of the community spirit and hope that kept people going until the joyous day they were liberated. That spirit still abides in Jersey today, and I draw hope and strength from that. Today, we do not just remember our island's liberation from occupation, we also draw strength from it. I share in the disappointment that we cannot celebrate in the way we'd hoped, but it is perhaps an even stronger tribute to those who lived through the occupation or died for their island and country to see a rekindling of the community spirit, resilience and resourcefulness that helped islanders through those dark years. Today, let us not dwell on the uncertain times we're currently facing, hard though that is. Instead, let us recognise in any ways that we can that joyous and momentous day 75 years ago. Alongside Deputy Russell Labey, the Chair of the Privileges and Procedures Committee, I've asked some States members to share their thoughts on the importance of Liberation Day for our community, our memory and our shared history.
I'm en route to Millais in St. Juan outside La Fontaine, home to Louisa Gould, who from 1942 to 1944 for 18 months sheltered an escaped Soviet slave worker. He was a former pilot, had been shot down and captured. His name, Fyodor Poliakarpovich Bury. Mrs. Gould called him Bill. Now, 200 yards up route to Millais is Five Roads Farm, home to Stanley and Irene Alexander and their daughter Pamela. This is a photo of them on Liberation Day. And they are my grandparents and my mum. And they were regular visitors here. Mrs. Gould had a little grocery shop on the corner of the building. And Bill the Russian was a regular visitor to Five Roads Farm. He painted some beautiful portraits of my family, all of which had to be destroyed. When a neighbour informed on Mrs. Gould and she was arrested, a Christmas card was intercepted from Bill to my family. They got a summons to appear at Silvertide, and when they left these farm gates on their bicycles, my mum thought she'd never, ever see them again. Silvertide in Havre des Pas was the headquarters of the German secret field police who modelled themselves on the Gestapo. I often think how terrifying it must have been for Stan and Irene to go through that black door. My grandmother was no fool. She clung to my grandfather to such an extent that they interrogated them together, and that, Irene always believed, was the secret of their good fortune. They could keep their stories the same. So they played it dumb, and they denied all knowledge, and they spoke Jersey French, and miraculously, they were let go. Louisa Gould died in the gas chambers of Ravensbrück in February 1945. We really should have a wonderful statue of her, shouldn't we? Thank you for letting me share this story on this special day.
This time last year, I had the honour of giving the Liberation Day address in the States Assembly. I spoke of the stories I had heard whilst growing up and recounted what members of my family had endured during the Jersey occupation and the London Blitz. Liberation Day for me, therefore, is a time for reflection and gratitude to our previous generations for the sacrifices they made for our freedoms today. Perhaps this year, more than any other, many of us will appreciate just a little more what freedom and civil liberties actually means. I've been using some of this time in lockdown to clear out eaves and lofts that seemingly hadn't been cleared out for more than 75 years. And I've come across a Canadian Red Cross box, still intact with the stamp of the Allied forces clearly visible. It was a poignant reminder that the Channel Islands remain one of the only places on British soil to have received humanitarian aid. So Liberation Day for me is a time for reflection, of thanks, of appreciation, not only for our freedom, but now for the freedom our little island can in turn bring to others around the world. Happy Liberation Day, Jersey.
The current crisis has brought an understanding of the hardships of the occupation, part of which was the lack of free speech and communication with relatives overseas. With technology, we have been able to communicate, and thankfully, we are not subject to deportation. It is important today that the government treat the older population like adults and trust in their common sense. It is one thing to shield us, but do not forget the older generation carried a significant part of the burden of occupation, and no one considered them too old then. I trust that everyone will have an enjoyable Liberation Day. Thank you.
Today we celebrate 75 years since Jersey was liberated from the rule of occupation during World War II. Normally I'd be going down to Liberation Square to sing the famous tunes, mingle in the buzzing crowd, and to cheer as the harbour master raises the flag. Liberation Day is a day when we come together as a community to relive that moment of joy when our grandparents regained their freedom. A freedom we have subsequently enjoyed for 75 years. However, this year gives us a different insight into Liberation Day. It's not going to be the celebration we had expected or planned, but it will be poignant because, like our grandparents, we are living under restriction. This pandemic, in some ways, will give us a different perspective on those war years. We are experiencing our own kind of occupation. We can't go out, see our friends, hug our vulnerable relatives. People are living in fear and uncertainty. So today, rather than resign ourselves to simply not celebrating Liberation 75 as we would have liked, let us think about the parallels between the occupation and our lives today. Let us remember that our grandparents lived like this, and in less comfort, for 5 years, not knowing if there would ever be an end. There was no vaccine coming for the war. Their resilience, their community spirit, their sense of honour, and of what is important, is awe-inspiring. Today, we celebrate them and the strength of our community.
For me, Liberation Day has always been about family, as both of my parents were here during the occupation. Now, as Constable of St Lawrence, I have a wider parish family, and those of them who were also here during the occupation have this year remembered, reminisced, and recorded their stories from that time. Their memories will soon be on display in a photographic exhibition to be held here in the Monyard Liberation Garden. Many of us will not be able to be with our families for Liberation 75, but however you spend Liberation Day this year, be safe, and best wishes from us all in St Lawrence.
Liberation Day is always a special day, but this year it's even more poignant as the restrictions on going out have in some way shown people of my generation and younger just how important our freedom is. Of course, this lockdown is nothing like being occupied. We are not short of food and we are not under the direct rule of an occupying force. Nonetheless, it's a worrying time for everybody. Let's try and put this virus in the back of our minds today and enjoy our freedom. Please keep safe and follow the government guidelines.
Enjoy Liberation Day, and thank you for listening.